So, hey everyone, we have Ben with us today. Before starting out, Ben, we've already got like 25 people watching, so I think people are really interested, for this session. Me as well. I think a lot of people have been waiting specifically for this one. But thank you so much for joining us, Ben, today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. So Ben is also a senior developer advocate at Auth0, and today we're gonna explore similar stuff with him, and I think it's gonna be very interesting. And we've got a lot of people already creating a lot of buzz in the chat there, and I've seen you even interacting with them a lot.
That's right.
Yeah, right. So thank you so much for joining us, and I would like to give over the stream to you directly. So yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Thanks for the intro. Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Dechrai. I am a developer advocate at Auth0. There was one question Vendit in the chat here asked what Auth0 is, and it's a very good question. So I'm doing something different today. I don't have any slides. I thought what I want to do with you is I've got the chat up here. I've also requested that if I miss anything, I'll be interrupted, so I won't miss your questions. We'll try and do a couple of demos of how to integrate Auth0. But first of all, what is it? Basically, it's an authorization identity platform. So rather than writing your own login boxes and your own permission systems and password resets and all of those kind of things, Auth0 manages all of that for you. So in the same way as you wouldn't write your own credit card processing, for example, you'd use something like Stripe or PayPal. There's no point in writing your own identity management when something like Auth0 can do that for you. It's based on OpenID Connect and the OAuth 2.0 protocol, so it's all standards compliant. If you use any other identity provider that supports it as well, it's going to be very similar in terms of operation. I think, Kushi, I think your audio is still on. I'm not sure whether that's intentional, but I can hear traffic in the background and stuff. Just so you know.
Okay, cool. So what I'll do is I'll just go at the back end and I'll leave the stream up to you. But just a quick update to everyone who is joining. We also have a special giveaway at the end for which more details will be provided. But a quick hint, make sure you attend the session with a full mind because there's going to be a lot of fun insights. And yeah, so I'm going to meet you and I'm going to update you with all the questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right. So so we've got my screen up there. I've got a couple of tabs here. We're going to do one example. I've seen some people in the Auth0 chat in Discord already asking about how to integrate Auth0 with React. I want to do a React demo, but it'll work for any single page app. So I've got one over here, React demo. I'm also going to start off, first of all, with a Node.js Express demo, which will kind of take into account any of you who are creating any of your hack solutions based on a more traditional type web application where you have a front end and a back end separately. What I don't want to do too much today is dwell on all of the technical stuff that's going on underneath, because the whole point of a product like Auth0 is you don't need to worry about that. But just to kind of give you an idea of why there is a difference between securing a traditional web application versus a single page web application. If you think of a traditional web app, there's a whole lot of code in the background that runs on a server. And you can have a session with your user in the browser, and that can be based on an HTTP-only cookie. So there's a lot of security around that. JavaScript can't access the cookie information. There's no way that a cross-site scripting attack or a malicious browser add-on can access that information. So it's fairly secure. When you look at a single-page application, though, everything's in the browser, and there is no back-end to have that session with. So the security risk there is a little higher, and there's a different way that we secure things in a single-page app. Raul's just asked me what the costs are for using Auth0. Auth0 it has a free kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a freemium product, essentially. So you can sign up for free. There's you can either go to auth0.com and sign up there, or there's also a link in the Auth0 channel in Discord for you to go to. And just sign up, create yourself a free tenant. There are certain limits, obviously, at which point you will be required to go up to a paid level. But those limits are really generous. I've been working at Auth0 for 2.5 years now, but before that, I was using Auth0 as a product for my own side projects, and I never paid a cent for any of the projects that I was working on. You can have up to 7,000 active users. You could have 2.5 billion users in your database if you want, but as long as only 7,000 are active in any one given month, you still fall into that free plan. And then there's some other things as well, some more enterprise functionality that you might need to pay for. All right, I'm going to keep going here with the demo. So what I've got is, I'll just put a link in. So let's have a look at Git remote V. So I'll just put a link to this. And that's probably not the best link to give, but I'll put this in the Auth0, Ask Auth0 chat. So I'm just going to put a couple of notes into that area over there for you to follow along with if you want. So go to github.com/Ben Dechrai/express series. Remove those bits around there. If somebody can do me a favor and fix that link for me in the chat, that'll be useful for other people. You can follow along with this code. Now, this is actually not promoted, this URL yet. I'm actually working on some separate videos that are going to go live soon to help people use Auth0 with Express. And this is part of that series. It hasn't been published, so you're going to be one of the first people to see this code. But in there are a couple of branches. So if you fancy following along, we've got 2 branches, episode 1, episode 2. They're the 2 episodes of the videos. I'm working on off episode 1, which is basically let's have a look at the code. So I'm going to use VS Code to go through this. And we have in here an app that, for those of you who don't know JavaScript or Express, don't worry about it too much. Most languages, except maybe Python, are C style, so you should probably be able to follow along. Even Python coders will probably be able to follow along with most of this. Thanks, Abel, for putting the link in there. So essentially what we're doing here is we're just bringing in Express. We've already installed that through npm install. We're defining a new router, which we'll have a look at in a second. We're using a views engine, so we're using embedded JavaScript as is it embedded JavaScript? I can't remember what EJS stands for, but it's basically a views templating engine for Express. A couple of other configuration things here, and then we start our server. And if you go to the root of this server, we're going to look at index.js. We basically have one handler, essentially, for an endpoint, which basically calls the render function on the response. We're calling the index view, and then we're passing in some metadata. And if we look at the index view, we basically have some very simple HTML that basically puts the title that we pass through in that metadata into the title tag, into the header tag, and into the paragraph tag. So that's all. You don't need to know exactly where we are up to here. I just wanted to give you like an insight into where we're starting from. If I now run npm start, and we open up a browser, we go to localhost 3000, we can see we've got the Express demo. Let's make that a little bigger, with the word demo in there, in here. So just as an example, if I came in and edited the route to just get rid of the word demo and I hit save, I think I need to restart Node for this to take effect. When we refresh, then the word demo is gone. So this is our local starting point. We've got routes, we've got views. This is similar to if you had any kind of Express app. You don't need to be using EJS or have your route set up in the same ways. But I wanted more than just a basic Express app to start from. OK, so what I'm going to do first is let's jump in here, and we'll go to auth0.com. Now, I already have an account. If you have an account already, you can log into that as well. One thing I would caution you, though, is if you are already using Auth0 and maybe it's for something that's in production or another project of yours, create a new tenant, and I'll show you how to do that. So if you don't already have an account, click on Login over here, and that'll take you through the process of creating a new account. I am not going to do that. I'm going to go to manage.auth0.com to my test dashboard. Let me just close that one. And once you've logged in, you'll get to a page that looks a little bit like this. You'll be asked a couple of questions like what you want to call your tenant. My tenant is called Ben Dechrai Test. You'll give your own tenant a name. Now, for those of you who do already have a tenant, you can come in here and create a new tenant. And if you want to do that for testing purposes or for your project separately, it keeps everything separate, which is great. I'm not going to create a new tenant because I just generally dump everything into my test for these kind of demos. If you have any questions around what I'm doing here, please feel free to stick them in the comments over there. I'll keep trying to keep an eye on that. All right, so once you're at this point, you've got your account created. What we want to do is we're creating a regular web application. We need to create configuration within Auth0 for this for our application to work with. So you can see here already that I created one called Express Demo App. What I'm actually going to do is create a new one so that we can go from absolute scratch here. So I call this one, it doesn't really matter what I call the other one. So I'm going to call this Express Demo 2. And we've got 4 options here for the type of application we're developing. We're building a regular web application. So as it says down here, there's like a Node.js Express app. Could be ASP, Java. If you're doing something in Flask, then that would be a back-end hosted application as well. The other options we'll have a look at in a second are single page app. This is where everything runs in the browser. We've got native. So if any of you are creating applications for the desktop or for a mobile phone, for example, you'll create a native type application. And if you have any need to create an API or multiple APIs that talk to each other, where there's no real user information, it's just a connection between two service accounts, essentially, to talk to each other, then you can create a machine-to-machine application. So I'm going to carry on here with the regular web application. We'll click on Create. What you'll notice is, depending on which one of those 4 you selected, you'll get a different list of sample projects. Now, not every technology is in here, but we do have a lot of them. So you can actually go straight in and do the quick start for Node.js Express. And that's what we're going to do. One thing Rahul's just asked, do free tier limits apply per account or per tenant? They're per tenant. So you can actually create a new tenant and you might notice, I created mine a bit too long ago. When you create a new tenant, you actually get a 22-day free trial of all the functionality. After 22 days, you lose anything that's for enterprise or pro accounts. So you can create new tenants all the time, but of course, remember that you're going to have different, like migrating your users. It's not going to be easy if you're looking for a backdoor way to continue getting free credits. It's going to be a lot of work. It's actually quite hard to migrate every time you want to. Not that it's something we try and make difficult on purpose, but it's just there's so much configuration inside here that it'd be a bit tricky. And also it's against the ethos, really. But I hope that answers the question. Auth0 is great. It clears the messiness of manual authentication implementation. Yeah, I really like it. I used to come from a background of, I still am very much an open source advocate, a community advocate, and I always used to think to myself that I am the most invested person in my users' security, which is not actually true when you think about it. If I'm writing, let's say I want to write a mobile app that allows me to do financial management. The thing that I want is for my users to be able to do financial management. A company like Auth0 is much more invested in my users being secure, because if I get it wrong, I get a slightly bad reputation. If Auth0 gets it wrong, there's potentially huge implications with a large organization that specializes in keeping users secure going wrong. So a friend of mine suggested that to me one day, that Auth0 is actually a lot more invested in my users' security than I am. And it's a really interesting perspective. It was a good reframing of that for me. Explanations are loud and clear. Awesome. That's great. All right, let's carry on. So we're going to do this Node.js Express. One thing I want to show you first before we go in there, let's pick on ASP.NET. We actually have 2 types of quick start at the moment. This is the original style of quick start, where you can see you can download a sample app. The beautiful thing about downloading these sample apps is they've got a whole load of configuration already built into them. It's actually generated exactly for your account. You'll notice up here, and we'll see more about what this means, but you'll notice up here there's a client ID. This was generated just now when I created my application configuration in the dashboard. That will actually be put into the zip file that you download, so it makes it much easier for you to get started. But if you wanted to do an integration, it takes you through this article, which also, if we look in here somewhere, we should see, I don't actually know .NET, so maybe it's not in there. But anyway, it's a long process here that you can just follow through and get it working. We've got a second, that's one finger, we've got a second version of our quick starts now, and Node.js Express has been updated to use this one. And it actually gives you it's almost like a choose your own adventure thing. You can download the sample app still, but this time we can start the integration process, and it actually takes us through almost a smart system to help us configure not just our application code, but also the Auth0 configuration settings. So one of the things you used to have to do was to go into the settings tab and find a certain area to update some information about your application. Let's actually just pull it out and put it right in here. And because we're going to be running ours on localhost port 3000, I'm going to go ahead and just accept these standard default settings. But essentially what we're doing is, in order to keep users secure, imagine if your powers of imagination are strong enough that you're logging into a web application, and what you're doing is you're making a request to a resource server. So that's a server with the information on it that you want access to. And in order to log in, the resource server is going to redirect you to an identity server. and you log into the identity server. And in order for the resource server to find out about your identity, it has to pass back some kind of a token of sorts. It's not an identity token. It's not a security token. It's more like a one-off code that has no relevance to you. It's just a randomly generated code, and has to send that back via a browser redirect. So in order to keep your users more secure, you define in the identity provider, Auth0 in this case, you define the callback URL that code can be sent to, so that it can't be sent to any other random server or application accidentally. That's what this callback URL here is for. So basically we're saying that once somebody's logged in, the only place that code can be sent to is the callback URL on localhost port 3000. And when you go into production or staging, you would update that to include other domains as well. And similarly, when you log out, the only place you can be redirected back to is localhost port 3000. So somebody can't accidentally be redirected or maliciously be redirected off to a whole different website. All right, I hope that explanation makes sense. You don't really need to understand exactly what's going on under the hood, so to speak. But please keep the questions coming through if you have any. So I'm just going to click on Save Settings and continue, because I am running on port 3000. So the next thing we need to do is follow these instructions, and this is basically it. This is it for Express on Node.js. We need to install Express OpenID Connect. I'm not going to install Express again. Obviously, we have that running already. So I'm just going to copy that, and we'll come in here. I'll stop the service for a second, and we'll npm install npm Express OpenID Connect. Now, while Auth0 is the author of this module, it's actually, like I said at the beginning, any OpenID Connect and OAuth 2.0 compliant identity provider that issues JSON Web Tokens and all of those kind of things, this module will work for them too, because it's open and standards compliant. All right, so the next thing we need to do now is we've got our application running, but we need to, obviously, we've added a module into the dependencies, but we now need to make that module available to our code. So the first thing we'll need to do is copy in this require the OpenID Connect module. And I'm going to put that into the top right in the app.js. So after we've pulled in Express, I'm going to say, in fact, I'll put that on the third line, just because I like to tell a story. We've got Express, we've got routing, we've also got some authentication. So I'm going to pull out the auth object from the Express OpenID Connect module. The next thing we need to do is define some configuration. So I'm just going to copy this and paste this in here, and then we can go through it. Let's just make it a little prettier. I like pretty, you might have noticed. Cool, just checking on the questions over there. So this is a randomly generated string. Now, if you are not sure how to generate one of those, there is actually a little hint at the bottom of this how-to here. You can run OpenSSL, blah, blah, blah. It probably works. I'm pretty sure it works on macOS, and I'm running on Linux here. I'm not sure whether that message changes if you're running Windows. Maybe it detects that in the browser. It'll be interesting to find out. Give it a try. Let me know. But there should be a little hint down there of how to generate it. I actually have a plugin in VS Code that allows me to generate random codes. So I'm going to call that one up, random letters and digits, custom length, and I'm going to create a 100-character random string. The base URL has been put in already because we defined that in the previous step. Like I mentioned, the client ID that has been generated for this application is put directly into the code. We call this live code because the code changes depending on the context of which you're pulling this out of. And then we've got the issuer, which is basically your tenant name followed by auth0.com. You might also have a .us or .eu.
Ben, we
Hello.
do have a question.
Yes. The multi-factor authentication?
Yes.
Yes. So I can actually give a demo of that towards the end, but essentially multi-factor, if you think of, I don't know whether you've heard of the phrase, something you know, something you have, and something you are. They're three of the major factors. There are other factors as well that are harder to test for. But something you know is like a password. Something you have is, I don't have one on me, but like one of the USB UB keys, like or a hardware authenticator that generates a number. And then something you are is a fingerprint or the voice. So these are three different factors of authentication. And if you mix two of those or more, that's multiple factors of authentication. So by and large, the something you know is your username and password. Username technically, potentially could also be public information, might be my email address, but the password is the something I know. And as we all know, passwords are really hard to remember. I would ask you to put your hands up if you've reused your password across multiple sites, but I can't see your hands unless you want to do like a hand emoji in the YouTube chat or something. But I'm sure I'm guilty as well. I've reused passwords because my brain is a human brain. It's spongy. It's not very clever. It's very hard to remember things, which is why passwords are a really bad mechanism. It's the best mechanism that we've had for a long time, but it's also not the greatest mechanism. So multi-factor authentication allows us to apply multiple factors in order to increase security. So I might still use a username and password, but I might also send an SMS code, or I might also ask somebody to touch the fingerprint scanner on their phone. And by having multiple factors, we can get a higher assurance that the person that's interacting with our systems is the person that we think they are. I hope that makes sense. The Hack-On Foundation has added another example would be how Auth0 or Google Authenticator helps you verify whether you're the one logging in. Exactly. So that would be like the authentication. I've forgotten the technical term of it, but yes, one of those hardware authentication devices. Yeah, cool. All right, carrying on. So we've brought this all in. One thing I'm going to do though, just because I like to do things, I like to clean things up. I like to make, we don't want to put this code into a GitHub repository. Technically, all of this information is non-private. The client ID is non-private. Actually, no, the secret is secret. We definitely can't put the secret into our GitHub repository. So before I do anything else, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to install .env. Now, even though .env is only used in a development scenario, in production, you would pull environment variables in another way. It gets installed as a production. When you do npm install, you can install it as a development dependency or a general dependency. We still put it in as a general dependency. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to require .env and call config on it without any parameter to it. And what this does is it's going to pull out anything that it finds in a .env file here. Hello? File or folder already exists. That's because I copied this over from somewhere else before. So let me just copy these bits here. Can't use my I'm traveling at the moment, and I don't have my normal keyboard and mouse. So I'm a little bit all over the place at the moment. So let me just make sure that these are all right. So I had a different issuer here. This was obviously for the video demo that I was doing before. So let me just update these. I'm basically just copying the information that got generated by Auth0 for us just now, and I'm putting them into these variables here. That one's the same, and we'll replace this one. So what I've done is I've basically taken what we had in this config configuration in app.js, and I've taken just these four here, because the first two Auth0 required, Auth required and Auth0 logout is true. They're general configuration that we can put into our app. That's fine. But the secret and possibly also these here so that we can use different configurations for different environments are things we want to put into our environment variables. So if I save this now, what .env does is it gives us access to process.env, hence it's called .env, and the file's called .env. And this now gives us access to secret, base URL, client ID, and issuer. So we have secret. Let's get rid of that. I'm just going to copy this to make it easier. So we had secret, base URL, client ID, and this one here I think was just shortened to issuer. Yep. Okay, so I've just saved that. We've got exactly what was specified to us in our, where's my browser gone, in here, except we've taken these 4 lines here out, we've put them into an environment variable file, and we're pulling them in through .env. So we've got our configuration. And so Vijay is just asked to clarify the secret field is a secret key obtained for each web application from Auth0. It's actually different. So the secret is just a long random string which is used by the authentication module to keep other bits of information more secure. So the secret string can be different to whatever else. We'll have a look in a second. I don't want to get off this page before we finish this part, but we'll have a look at the settings in a second just to see what's going over there and the secret key that Vijay is referring to. But it is separate. It's a different thing. Basically, this is just something you randomly generate yourself. All right, so the final part here is that we need to use app.use. And app.use, let me just paste this in first and then I'll talk about it. App.use is a way of adding what's called middleware. So you have a request that comes in, and then Express is going to handle the request and the response and all of that at the other end. And you can put middleware in the middle. One bit of middleware we've got is called express.json. And what this does is if a post request comes in, or a put or a patch, I think just those three, then any data that comes in is usually treated as just plain text, but sometimes it can be JSON. And if it detects it to be JSON, what this middleware does is it'll change the request object that comes into your request handler, so into this request object that comes into the function that you're writing to handle a request. It'll automatically detect that JSON and convert it into JSON for you to work with straight away, which is a great helper function. Similarly, if you have a query string come in on a URL, or the question mark thingy equals something ampersand thingy else, the URL encoded will automatically parse that and make that much easier for you to use within your application. It's middleware, stuff that happens in the middle. We've got another one here called static, which basically says if you find any requests that are already in the public directory, so a request that comes in for stylesheet/style.css will be handled automatically as static content. So it doesn't even hit an endpoint. What we're doing now is we're adding another one, saying we want to add some authentication, we want to add some middleware. We want to add a processing step before we start rendering the result or handling the request. And what we want to do is put in some authentication stuff. And here's the configuration for what's going to happen. And what this does is it doesn't just take this information and then handle any tokens that come in. It actually adds a few endpoints for us as well. So by adding this, we've now got a /login and a /logout URL created for us automatically. And when somebody goes to localhost port 3000/login, they'll be redirected to our login URL at this URL here. When they go to logout, it'll send a message to the identity provider to say logout and also remove the local sessions. So a whole lot of helper stuff that's added automatically just through this one line. That's probably the most important part of this. We've configured it, we've brought in the module, and this one line adds so much functionality to your application. It's just amazing. All right. So what I want to do now, I have saved this now. Let's come into routes, because at the moment we've got a request. We've got some kind of authentication. We don't really have anything to do with it. We're not doing anything with that information. So for now, I'm just going to put a console login so we can see what's happening. And on the request, the parameter that's come in, we've now got an extra. This won't come up by default in your IntelliType, except now through the Auth0 library, it's added this OIDC or OpenID Connect object. And in there's a whole lot of information we can get out. We can get the access token. We can get an ID token, which is probably going to be one of the most important things that you're looking for during the hackathon. This tells you about the identity of the user that's just logged in. We also get the user itself. Now, the ID token is a JSON Web Token, so you'd have to process that yourself. But the Auth0 library will, or the Express OpenID Connect library, rather, will automatically take that identity token and convert it into a user object. So this is the bit that we're actually going to be interested in. So I'm just going to dump that out. I'm going to log it out. There's a question here about what the actual use of the secret key is. To be honest, I haven't delved in exactly to where the secret key is used, but generally, and Kartik has suggested there's some kind of encryption, generally it is around having some kind of seed for hashing or a key for encryption, so the data can be stored in a way that if somebody got access to your server directly, they still wouldn't be able to use a lot of the data that's stored in the local session information. So in a standard web application, like I mentioned, where you've got a server and potentially an HTTP-only cookie with the client or the browser, there'll be a whole lot of information stored in memory on the server that is associated with that session ID. So it's never stored in the browser itself. The cookie is just an identifier that the server then receives with a request and can use to locate the session information. Some of that session information could be encrypted, and if so, that's probably where this secret is being used. I can't guarantee that because I haven't looked into it deeply, but in other situations where I've seen a secret like this, that's just generally what its purpose is. The VS Code that I'm using, VS Code theme, is, I don't know which one's installed, but I've got material icons. I thought it is Cobalt 2. I'm pretty sure it's the Cobalt 2 one that's installed. Yeah, it is currently Cobalt 2. If it's not Cobalt 2, it is. There we go. Well spotted. Let me know as well if it's not big enough or if there's anything else I can do to make this demo clearer to you. All right, so where are we at now? I keep diverting, which is great. I love your questions, and I'm happy to divert, but let's gather it back in again. We've installed the OpenID Connect module. We've put in the configuration. We've been sensible and exported this out into a .env file that won't get added to our GitHub repository. We've added it in as middleware, and then we've modified our route to log the user information. The thing that we don't have yet is a login or a logout link. If I start, if I do an npm start again, and we come back over here, we've still got the same page. Now I could just come in here and type login, oops, like this, and that would take me to the login page. But let's just put a couple of links at the top here so that we can click on them, and then also we'll be able to work out how to show just the one that we need. So I'm going to jump into the view, and above the title, that's where you should put a navigation, isn't it? Let's put a nav object in. I'm going to create an unordered list and list items with a link to, I can't type, login. I'm just not used to this keyboard. And log out. All right, so now if I refresh, we've got a login and a logout button. Not beautifully styled, but it'll do for the purposes of the demo. So if I click on login, it's going to take us through to the Auth0 login page. And you can see here that it's given me the name of the application that I created to log into. If you want to look through over here, things like branding, and also we can come in to the settings now, and you can change the name that shows up, various things like that. Go ahead and make it look pretty and exactly the way you want it to. You can change the logo, you can change the colors, you can change the background color, various things. But I'm just going to carry on with what I have here. So also, if you've created a new tenant, you won't have any users yet. I probably already do because this is one of my test tenants. I do. So I'm going to come in and log in as my test account, like so, and my password. There we go. You might get this little authorization thing. That's only going to happen for you in localhost. Once it goes into a non-localhost domain, it'll be fine. So I'm just going to accept that. And we get redirected back over here. And it looks exactly the same. We haven't seen any change yet. Just checking all the questions. You're liking the dark theme? I like dark themes too. Even this screen here is too bright for me. I need a new style sheet for this. All right, so we've got our login and our logout. Let's jump in here now. And in fact, no, down here. So we had our console log, and we wanted to find out what the user was. Here's the information that came out of the identity token. Now, I don't know if you're in the chat at the moment, but I had a couple of questions over the last 10 hours or so in the Auth0 channel on Discord asking how to get the information out from the token. So depending on what kind of library you're using, it should be made available to you fairly readily. And here's the information that came back from Auth0 with the login process, with basically the payload of the identity token. So when I first created my account, obviously I had to provide an email address. So that's what we've got for name. Because Auth0 only asks for an email address and a password to sign up, it doesn't know what your nickname is. So what it's done here is it's just basically taken the part before the @ and it puts into the nickname. The picture, because I have a Gravatar profile picture, it's which is associated with my email address. It's pulled that out. You can see when my account in the Auth0 tenant was most recently updated. Whenever you do any kind of login or creating of a new account with an email address, you're probably familiar with getting that email that says, please verify that this email address is yours by clicking here. So when I created my account in this tenant, I would have received one of those emails. To this date, I still haven't clicked on that link, which is why email verified is false. If I click on that link, it'll be true. This is really useful for you as developers because it means that if somebody logs in and it's still false, you might choose not to send them emails because you can't verify that they are actually the owner of that email address. Whereas if it's true, then you can. The most important part, perhaps, for you, though, is SUB, and this stands for subject. There are a number of standard three-letter key value pairs, or keys for key value pairs, in an identity token and an access token. And SUB is the subject of the person in an identity token who's just logged in. So every time I log in, even if I change my username or my password or where I'm logging in from, my account has a unique identifier, which is this. So now in your database, again, going back to my example of having a system where you can manage your finances, you're going to need to have a database with tables around statements and accounts and, I don't know, maybe alerts, but they'll all tie back to a user still. You'll still need a user database. The only difference with using something like Auth0 is you don't need to store a username and password. So you don't need to worry about password hashing and making sure it's secure and updates and all of those things. Instead of a username and password, you just need to store one value, and that's this subject. And now when I log in, or anybody logs in, you grab the subject out of the identity token, and then you can say, have a look in your database and say, find the user that has the subject, whatever that subject is that just came through in the identity token. I hope that explains how the identity token helps you identify exactly who's logged in. And of course, if you don't have a user in your database with that token, that's the point at which you can create it. It's the first time they've logged into your system. Therefore, you can now create a user record with that subject. Vibe has asked, what if the domain is HTTP and not HTTPS? To be honest, in this day and age, you shouldn't be running it over HTTP. If you need to log into a system, you're going to have to trust the traffic that's coming through. And if it's not over TLS, or if it's not transport layer security, if it doesn't have HTTPS at the start, you can't trust the data that's coming. It could have been modified along the way by any number of servers between you and the end user. I'd be interested to know if you have a reason why you would want to do over HTTP. Please feel free to stick that in there, or join me in the Auth0 channel in Discord later, and we can have a chat if you're having issues around running things over HTTPS. The only time you do run things in HTTP is when it's localhost. When it's localhost, it doesn't matter because it's just development. So there's an exception to most OpenID Connect providers that generally have to only connect with an HTTPS server unless it starts with HTTP//localhost, and then you can have HTTP. Does Auth0 provide integration with PHP CMS frameworks like Laravel, WordPress, Magento? Yes. We can jump back over here. Let's just go into applications. So here's a regular web application we just started. And if we go to Quick Start and we change the technology, you can see over here we've got Laravel, we've got PHP in general, got Django, Next.js, a whole lot of other things. There is also a WordPress plugin for Auth0, which I've used, and it's actually really clever because what it'll do, it's capable with a couple of extra steps, and it's beyond the scope of this demo to go into that, but it'll actually do a whole lot of the configuration in Auth0 for you automatically as well, which is pretty cool. But generally, if you search for whichever technology you're using and the word Auth0 in Google, you should find, probably on the auth0.com domain, either a blog or a quick start to help you with that particular technology. Any websites which implement Auth0 to C? Atlassian, any of Atlassian's products, they all use Auth0. They actually had a whole team working on their own identity solution, and they moved to Auth0 a number of years ago, and they managed to take their whole team of, I don't know, a dozen or so developers, and rather than working on identity, they now work on making Jira better, and etc. and so on. All right, so technically we're logged in at the moment, but sorry, I just change a view over on this side here. I want to be able to carry on seeing your messages. Okay. So technically, we're logged in, but it would probably be nice to be able to see whether or not only show the login or log out button depending on my status. So let's do a couple of things. We're going to pass these through in our into our view now. So I'm going to say I want to pass the user in, which is going to be request.oidc.user. I also want to pass in is authenticated, and that's going to be request.oidc. Now, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but this is where this comes in useful. Is authenticated, it's actually called the same thing. So is authenticated, this is actually a method. So I'm going to just open and close the parameters on there and hit save. And again, I need to restart Node because I've changed one of the JavaScript files. Also, when you're doing this, there is this little message at the bottom here. Using form post for response mode may cause login issues for you logging over HTTP. Again, once you're in production, you should be running over HTTPS, so this won't be an issue. Essentially, what this is outlining is that with the change in the way that some of the latest browsers, especially Chrome, I think Chrome is the main one that has an issue with this, is because they've changed the way that they handle third-party cookies. The login process might not always work, but over HTTPS, it's not an issue again. So don't worry about that message in development. All right, so if I hit refresh, nothing's going to change because now I need to change the view. So let's first of all come down here, and I'm just going to output the, what do I call it, the user object. And in fact, what we'll do first is we'll JSON stringify the user, and I'll just put in some little formatting stuff, save that, and now we get the user information out that we saw in the console log before. And also up here, we can say if is authenticated. In fact, we want to log in if we're not authenticated. So if we're not authenticated, then show the login button. Otherwise, we want to show the logout button. And then we'll just close this block off. Like so. Save, refresh. Now we've only got the logout button because we're logged in. If I click on logout, it'll take us back to the same page again. We've got the login button, and we don't have the user information because I'm no longer logged in. So I'll just click on login again. Type my name properly. And now we're logged in. We can only see the logout button, and we've got our information here, including the subject. Now, obviously, you wouldn't show the subject to the user. There's no harm in doing that. It's technically not private information. It's probably better just to keep it a bit obscure. It's not going to help anybody. But yeah, you can now use this URL to output the picture. You can say hello to them, and you can talk to your other backend databases that require any kind of knowledge of who the user is and pass that subject in. So that's taken us about 45 minutes, I think, if my maths is correct, 40 minutes to integrate. But there's been a lot of talking. Technically, you can probably get this done in about 5-10 minutes. And that's authentication plugged into your Express app. Using NodeMun should help restarting the server. That's actually in episode 2, which, so the code, if you check that code out and go to episode 2, it'll actually have all of the Auth0 stuff that I've just done, plus NodeMun. So that'll certainly make it easier. Any other questions? Okay, so Vaibhav has come back and talked about not having hosted over any domain before. So depending on how you're going to put your hack, your solution into production, if you're creating a web app, if you use something like Netlify, for example, they're going to give you some random string.netlify.app domain, and that'll be over HTTPS already. In most cases, if you're writing any kind of web application, either a full web app like an Express backend, frontend, or a single page app, then it's going to be hosted in an environment for you using one of these tools. If you're using AWS for hosting or Heroku, they're all going to be providing you with an HTTPS endpoint. So you shouldn't need to worry about that technically. All right, if there are any questions about Express, stick them in the questions and I'm happy to come back to them. What I'm going to do now is, because some of you are using React, I just want to quickly go through the React process. I won't go as all over the place because I'd like to kind of constrain this to an hour of demos. But after that, we'll also be having an AMA. So you can ask me questions about anything to do with the demos we've just done, anything authentication, web dev related. We also have Abel Matthew in the chat at the moment, who is one of the Auth0 ambassadors. The Auth0 ambassadors are a group of developers who are really passionate about Auth0 and love to help other developers become better developers, either through using Auth0 or any other kind of help that we can provide. And he'll be joining me in the AMA as well. So how can you call your API from a rule? Rahul, that's going probably a little more into where this demo is going. Essentially, what Rahul was asking about is this authentication pipeline where you can actually put your own custom JavaScript into the authentication flow by putting JavaScript into the Auth0 dashboard. So essentially, we're kind of hosting Lambda functions for you, which is really powerful. But that's beyond the scope of this demo. But I would be happy to go into a chat with you in Discord, and maybe we'll set up another video where anybody else can join in as well. We'll do a Discord video screen share, and we can go more into the rules. Maybe you can share your screen as well if you have any particular issues, and we can knock that out there. I hope that works. T-shirt winning criteria will come soon. Keeping you hanging. All user account related data is stored on Auth0 server. So how can I interact with the user's data in the backend for further processing? Great question. So under applications, we've got APIs. By default, when you create your tenant, you'll have an Auth0 management API endpoint configured in here. Everything that you can do through this dashboard, you can do through the management API for your tenant. In fact, there are even some things that you can't do through the dashboard that you can do through the API. So if you want to come through and do a list of users, then you can get your list of users through the API management, the Auth0 management API. Auth0 users also allow you to store a bit of extra information. So this is beyond the scope of like the original point of this demo, but it might be useful for you to know that you can store random arbitrary JSON in each user's separate account. So if I came in here and I put in, I don't know, age is 44, and I hit save, invalid metadata, probably because I need that. There we go. So now this app metadata is now available to my application if I make a request to the Auth0 management API and say, hey, give me the app metadata for the account that has this user ID, which is the one ending in DCF, which you'll notice is this one here. That's my user. So in this application here, I could make an API management call and say, give me the app metadata. And then you can store other information in here if you want. I've actually written an application for a friend of mine works for a community organization. They wanted to run a raffle. So I've created an application for them where people can log in. And then in the app metadata, I store a reference to their Stripe customer ID. So I'm using Stripe for payments for selling the raffle tickets. When Stripe takes a payment, it'll create a customer ID for the person who's just bought raffle tickets. That customer ID I store in app metadata. And what this means is that my front-end application, my React app, doesn't need a database, because the only thing I need to store is the connection between Stripe and Auth0, which I do in here. Now, the user metadata is similar. You can also store information with that. The difference between these two here is that the app metadata can only be updated by the application, by your application, because it'll use a secret key to communicate with the management API. Now, it's very important to know that you shouldn't be doing this from a React app, because React is in the foreground. Whereas the user metadata can be updated with anybody who has the ID token of the person who's logged in. So you don't want to put information into the user metadata that you don't want your users to change without you knowing or without your control. I hope that makes sense.
We do have some more questions. Ben, would you like to answer them now?
Yeah, sure.
So one question is about the Auth0 ambassadors program. I think we can answer that in the AMA. right now we can just answer some of the demo related questions. Does it
Yep.
also allow to integrate some gateways?
Gateways. Is there more? I'm trying to find that question at the moment. Is there more context to that question?
No, I think we can ask Ishan. Ishan is there in the chat. Ishan, can you just give a little bit more context in what type of in your question? That would be great.
Yeah, integrate some gateways. Yeah, I'm not sure what that question means, to be honest.
Sure, I think we can just let him give some more context. We
Yeah,
have another one.
Manav asked about the Google, Facebook, or other, which is a great question. So yes, if I just log out and I log in again, you'll see that by default, when you create your tenant for the first time, the default one that comes up is Google. I've added Twitter in. You can actually add a whole load of different ones. So under authentication, there's various different authentication backends that you can use. By default, when I log in, I use a username and password, and that gets added into this username and password authentication database. This comes pre-built out of the box for you in your brand new tenant. I've created a MongoDB as well. That was for another demo. But if you have a Mongo database, you could use that for your user database. But again, it's going to be username, password form. But to log in via Google and Twitter and all of those, you come into social connections. As you saw, I've got Twitter and Google based authentication added into mine already. But there's a whole load of different ones here that you can select from. Even Discord. So you could use the Discord server that we have at the moment, perhaps. Maybe it has to be your own Discord server, probably, to do authentication. But yeah, pick any of these, and then you can log in with a third-party login provider. Now, the advantage of this is obviously that people don't need to create a new username and password. The subject that comes back, let's see if I can just find that here quickly. Okay, so this part here, the subject that comes back, you'll see here, this one starts with Auth0. This basically means that it's an Auth0 managed database. If you log in with Google, it'll say Google. If you log in with Twitter, it'll say Twitter. But that's basically a namespace. Don't rely on it. If you see that coming through, it's useful to see sometimes. But just as a heads up, if you are using other authentication providers, this part here will change, which basically is a signifier of which database mechanism you're using or authentication mechanism you're using to connect user identities to your Auth0 user identities.
We have another question, which is there any way to call APIs secured by Auth0 and Postman?
In Postman specifically,
Right, yeah.
right. So this is stepping ahead a little. So let me just do a little bit of filler information so that everybody on the video can kind of get an idea of what's happening. So at the moment, when we log in, let me find my browser. Here it is. Okay, I'm going to open up my network tab so we can see what actually happens when I log in at a network level. So let's do this again. So remember how I said that once I was looking at the authentication server would send a code via a redirect back to the application. So that's what's happening here. I think it's in there. So it's actually a redirect, this one here. So there's the state, and anyway, it's unimportant where that comes from. But what essentially that means then is there's a post request created to the callback that then provides in the response. Why is this not showing me what I'm expecting it to show? XHR. I'm thinking about React single page apps. Ignore everything I just said. Because what's happening is actually it's a connection between the server and Auth0. It doesn't go via the browser for a server backend process. But what happens is what we've seen so far is the identity token coming back. We also have an access token. And in fact, what I can do is I can just output the access token so we can see what that looks like. So in here, we've got OIDC user. Let's just in here do access token. And we'll do a log out and log back in. So we should now see down here undefined, probably because that's a function. My bad. I won't do it again, but essentially what's going to come through is something that is not a JSON Web Token. So a couple of steps before we look at how to use Auth0 for authentication. Say, for example, you have a front-end application like a single-page app that needs to talk to our Express server. And let's say our Express server here is just an API as opposed to a fully functional web application that returns HTML and those kind of things. So you would have a very similar process here in app.js. You would still pull in the OpenID Connect provider. You would also pull in another function. In fact, no, you wouldn't be calling the Express one in. You would be calling in Express JWT or JWT Express, I think, and JWKS RSA. So have a look at these two modules if you're using Express as an API. If you're using anything else as an API, there'll be similar modules out there. But essentially what this is doing is it's allowing Express to see any of the JSON Web Tokens that are coming in, and then use JWKS, which is the JSON Web key set, to pull down the public key for verifying it. And we're going a little bit into the weeds now on exactly how it works. But essentially what you're doing when you make a request from your front-end application, let me just start a new tab over here, and we'll make this JavaScript just so it looks pretty. So say, for example, you've got a call from your front-end React app, and you're making a call to my API/foo. Now, in here, what you would normally be doing is you would be passing in headers, and one of those headers would be authorization bearer access token goes here. So this is where the JSON Web Token goes for the access token. I hope this is making sense. From your question, I'm not sure exactly how much you know about talking to the API in general anyway, but this is how the authorization, how the access token gets passed into an API. Therefore, in Postman, you can do exactly the same thing. When you're defining your headers in Postman, you define a header called authorization, and then you just put in bearer space and then the access token. In fact, I think there's even an author. I don't have Postman installed on this laptop, so I can't show you. But from memory, there's also an authorization tab as well as a headers tab. And I think if you just go to the authorization tab, there's a drop-down box, and it probably has bearer as an option. And then there's just a text box, and in there you just paste the access token, which should be a JSON Web Token. If you are looking for one step before all of that happens in Auth0, you need, under applications, to come into APIs, and you need to define your API in here. And then, let's say I have some Express API. Running on some port, wherever. Once you've defined this, you need to make sure that the Express Demo 2, which is the one I'm working on at the moment, you need to say that once I've logged into Express Demo 2, Express Demo 2 should get an access token that can be used for talking to the Express API. So there's a couple of little things you need to add in. And I feel like I'm already verging too far away from, I don't want to confuse everybody in the channel. I'd love to go through this more in Discord later, if that's something you're having a specific issue with within your hack. I think for the purposes of most people watching this video who just want to integrate Auth0 to make sure that a user is logged in before they start worrying about talking to APIs and that kind of thing, I'll leave it at this, if that's okay. Vijay just said, is the subject basically a unique ID? Yes, that's exactly what it is. Ardash says Cobalt 2 is Love Heart. I agree. Deepak says, hey, I'm using Auth0 Universal Login. It's easy and intuitive, but I had one doubt. How can I redirect to a default endpoint and not resume state when the user requires auth from a non-default endpoint? How can I redirect to a default endpoint and not resume state? Not sure what that question means. Feel free to either clarify maybe, or maybe this is something we take into a Discord one-on-one chat. or even like a group chat, but where you can join a video and I can hear you and we can talk through that. Sumia has asked if Auth0 has a free tier and what the limits are. They have. I mentioned at the beginning that there's a couple of different limits, 7,000 monthly active users, for example, a couple of things that aren't available with the social logins. You can have 2 active on the free tier. If you want to know more about pricing and tiers and all of those things, let's have a chat with that either in the AMA or in Discord. Garo was asked about the pricing model as well. I'm afraid I can't talk about differences between different stacks, mostly because I'm not really familiar with pricing models of different providers. There are so many different providers out there, and the models keep changing. It would be impossible for me to keep up with. So I'm afraid that's research you're gonna have to do yourself, I'm afraid. Is there a magic link kind of feature to recover account in case I forgot password, part similar to what Slack uses? Sort of. So Auth0 is so flexible, you can almost do anything you want. If you've forgotten password, you can click on a forgotten password link and it'll send you a password reset. But what you could also do is have a passwordless login mechanism where you can log in with just a link that gets sent to an email address. So there's a couple of different options for that.
Ben, I think we also got some context to the question. We, I think, dropped at that point, which is by Ishan, which said, yeah. So basically, he's trying to say that the gateways refer to some payment gateways.
Okay, so talking to something like Stripe using an Auth0 token, I assume. So with Stripe particularly, as an example, I would say no. The issue you're going to have when you're trying to talk to third-party APIs is those APIs need to trust your Auth0 tenant. So the short answer is yes, but it's not as straightforward as just ticking a box. So if you have a real-world example and you want to go through it with me, I think that's something we take in Discord, maybe have a video chat and go through that. But I don't think this is the right place for me to go in depth on that, mostly because it's a fairly specific kind of a question and issue. Do we have some Auth0 sandbox kind of things to play around with before trying and starting integration of product? Auth0 is free. Just create a tenant. If you want to have 2 tenants, have 2 tenants, one for staging, one for production. That's fine too.
I think we're done with the questions until now. If you are to continue with the demo, you can.
Okay, sure. Yeah, cool. Rahul's asked what kind of 2-factor authentications are available. Let me just jump into that very quickly. Authentication, we have passwordless authentications that allow you to do authentication by sending an SMS or an email. So basically, you just get a code, and you've got to type that in. And we also have, under security, multi-factor auth, you can do web authoring with FIDO security keys, device biometrics. So that'd be like, actually, this one doesn't have it. Maybe facial, but the fingerprint reader on the back of the Pixels 2, Pixel 2's one-time passwords. This one's an interesting one. Push notification via Auth0 Guardian. So in the Apple and the Google stores, you can download Auth0 Guardian. It's an app that anybody can download, and then you can register that so that you get a push notification. But even better than that, if you have your own mobile app written for, like your native app for a mobile phone, we have an Auth0 Guardian SDK. So you can bring that in, and then you can actually have your application prompt the user to allow them whether or not to log in. We can do it via a voice message. Users receive actually a text message or even a voice call with a number. Email, again. So this is more second-factor authentication, whereas the other one was passwordless authentication. Passwordless is where you don't even have a username and password, whereas here an email second-factor authentication would come after the user has provided a username and password, or logged in with a social like Google, Twitter, etc. And then also, this is a fairly popular one for enterprises, if they're using Duo security, you can use that as a second factor as well. I hope that makes sense. Kumar's going to be using Auth0 for the next Flutter app. Wonderful. Nice to hear. All right, so let me find where am I going? Over here. So actually, let me just come into Visual Studio. Let's close this one because we don't need that anymore. We can always come back to the Express one if you have any questions, but let's have a look at React. So essentially, this React demo here was created with, I can't even find it, npx create React app. It wasn't called Azure demo, it's called React demo. But this basically, what we have in this directory here is a brand new out-of-the-box React app. I've done nothing else to it. So let's load code and have a look and see what's going on in here. So we have our source files, we've got our app.js, and if I start our application over here, oops, let me just close. Don't need that one anymore. We'll keep that open. Okay, so if you've ever created a standard React app from scratch, you'll be familiar with the screen. Let's start by getting rid of some of the cruft. So I don't want any of this. Okay, cool. That's looking much better already. So what we want to do is to, first of all, implement Auth0, and then we'll have a look at how different components can use that information to show or not show various bits of information about the user, or even whether or not to allow them to see the endpoint or the view that we're looking at. So let's jump back into Auth0 over here. We'll go to Applications. We're going to create a new application. And I'm going to call this Hack on React Demo. And this time we're going to choose single page web application. Okay, let's hit create. Which is better, Auth0 or Postman to play with API and using projects? They're very different products. So Auth0 is going to be providing the tokens for you to be able to authenticate users and authenticate connections to APIs, whereas Postman is a developer tool for interacting with APIs. So it's not really a comparison. We're going to create a React app if you're using Angular or Vue, or if you want a generic JavaScript version, there are quick starts for that as well. Let's come in here. This is the older style quick start that I mentioned before. So we'll step through this. So it comes with a whole lot of screenshots, but if you remember, the first thing we did with Express is we had to define the callback URL and the logout URL. We also, for single-page apps, need to define an allowed web origin. So in our case, we are using port 3000. So I'm just going to copy that out of the documentation here. I'm going to come up to the top, and I'll open in a new tab. Nope, that didn't open in a new tab. That wasn't very helpful. Okay, let's just come over here anyway. Okay. So here's the client ID and the domain that we're going to need to put into our application in a second. Here's a client secret that was referred to. There was one of the questions before about whether or not the secret in the Express code was the same as the client secret. It's not. What this client secret is basically, it's a way for Auth0 to be contacted by another system. It's almost like an API key or a password to allow another server to talk to Auth0 about being this client. Because we're doing a single page app, everything goes into the browser. Essentially, everything can be publicly read. It's published into a web page, so we're not going to be using the client secret because it's not going to be secret. All right, so we need to define the callback URL. So this is where that token, that access code can be sent to. The logout URL, where the user can go to after they've logged out, and the web origin. So I'll just explain a little bit about what the web origin's for, because it's actually really cool. Imagine you've got a React app. We do have a React app. So we've got a React app, and we're about to log in. And when the user logs in, this auth code gets sent back to the browser, and the code, the npm module that we're about to install, so that React. I'm just going to change the battery in my camera because I think it's about to die. Excuse me. Highly professional. So what happens when you're on the road? Is it working again? Come on, there we go. Hello, welcome back, everybody. My name's Ben. How are you doing today? All right. So we've got our React app. We've just logged in. The auth code has been sent back to our application. What the React module that we're about to install for Auth0 does is it then does a post request to Auth0 behind the scenes, an XML HTTP request, like through fetch, that kind of thing, makes a post request for the actual tokens. When that request goes through, Auth0 needs to make sure that it's coming from the right origin. Also, if we imagine now that we've logged in and our web application has some information about the user, it's got the tokens, it stores them in a local variable. If we do a right-click open in new tab, or we close the browser and reopen it, or we just refresh the current tab, we're going to lose that information. So the user's going to be logged out. What Auth0 does, and a few of the other identity providers, is something called transparent reauthentication. So put your imagining hats on again, and imagine you're the web browser, and the user's just refreshed the React application. You're not going to know anything about the user. You don't know whether they're even logged in. So we're going to create, there's two ways. We can either use a web worker, which is the current model, and there's also a backup model where we create an iframe that's outside of the view area, so the user doesn't see it. And essentially what we're doing is we're making a request to Auth0 to say, hey, do you currently have, because remember, Auth0 is a backend front-end server application, it can have an HTTP-only cookie with your user, whereas your React app can't. So it says to Auth0, is this user already logged in? And Auth0 is either going to say no, in which case React now knows that there's no user, or it's going to say, yes, here's some tokens for you. And it'll pass those back into your application transparently, which is a really cool way of making sure your users stay logged in. Now, with that request to say, hey, is the user logged in? Again, we only want to serve those if they come from the application. And that's what this web origin is. So again, another security protection mechanism that says only the application running on localhost on port 3000 can make any kind of backend request from a single page app perspective. I hope that's clear. For single page sites, which would I recommend, React or Angular? Okay, so if you're asking me personally, I would say React, because I don't know Angular. I was actually watching an Angular video that a colleague of mine created the other day, and it's really cool. It's quite different, and I can understand what's going on when I read the code, but I wouldn't be able to do it from scratch. So personally, I would use React. What I'm trying to say is there is no right or wrong. If you don't know either, just pick one and learn it. If you know one better, for the purposes of this hackathon, go with what you know. Hackathons, I think, are great for learning new technologies. But if you do that at the expense of the time required of you that you can actually dedicate to creating a solution, that's something you've got to balance up, way up. So personally, I would always go with something in a time-constrained hackathon. I would go with something that I'm already familiar with. Unless I was doing something brand new that I wasn't familiar with at all, which might be your case, in which case I would just pick one and stick with it. Unless it got really hard, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that I don't answer your question, because there is no right or wrong answer. Maybe my answer should have been, don't use either, use Vue. No, really. Whatever you feel comfortable with. Now that I've changed these, I need to come down and hit the Save Changes button. That's something that I often forget to do, and I want to make sure that you know that, because sometimes I've come in and I've added these in, and then I go back to my application and it's not working, and it's because I haven't clicked Save. So I've clicked Save there now. Let's come back into our quick start for React. Okay, so we've done this first part. We have configured the callback URL, the logout URL, and the allowed web origins. So now we're going to install the React SDK. So copy this. Just going to stop. There we go. Install Auth0 React. Now we've got a number of generic SDKs, but this SDK has been written specifically for React, and it gives us a whole lot of extra functionality within the way that React components work. It's actually got an Auth0 provider, which if you know about React, you can wrap your whole application in a provider, which makes it much easier to access the authentication functionality from all the different components without all of that chaining nonsense of passing information all over the place. If that doesn't make any sense to you, it doesn't need to. So rather than copy and pasting all of this, because half of it's in there already, we've already pulled out React DOM and app back here. So if we look at the top of index.js, we've got React, React DOM, and our app. We're also pulling in some CSS and stuff. So in index.js, I'm now going to pull in our Auth0 provider from the Auth0 React module that we just installed. And then rather than using React strict mode, I'm going to wrap the whole application. Here we go. In this Auth0 provider, and then just close this off properly. So the app here, for those of you who aren't familiar with React, the app here is basically rendering whatever is defined in app.js. We pull that in over here. So our main application is defined in app.js, and index.js is basically this core root part that starts off the React application. And basically what we're doing is we're saying this here is what gets rendered. We could just render the app. What we're doing is we're wrapping the whole application in the Auth0 provider, which now means, and we'll see this in a second, that all of the React components that we're going to use can use an Auth0 hook in order to pull information out about the user if they're logged in. So I'm going to hit save on that. Now again, we should probably move the client ID and the domain out into an environment variable. For the purposes of this demo, I'll leave that as an exercise for you. Very similar, just install.env, but I'm just going to leave it at this for now so we can get on with the demo. Any questions? Nothing new coming through. Sweet. All right, so now moving on to the next part, adding login. So I'm just going to copy and paste this all together. We're going to create a new login button in our React application. So again, if you're familiar with React, you'll probably want to break each of these components out into separate files and include them. What I'm going to do, though, for the purposes of this demo, is I'm just going to put things into files together so that we can see what's going on a bit more clearly. So I'm just going to create, I'm not going to export this, I'm going to create this login button here. And actually, I'm wondering whether this part will break. I probably can't do that here because I'm importing React. So let me do the sensible thing and actually do this correctly. So let's create a new file, and we'll call this login button.js. And we'll paste this in. So what we're doing is we're creating a new React component. We're exporting this login button component, which is using the Auth0 hook. So this is provided by, again, the Auth0 React. And because the application has the Auth0 provider wrapped around it, and I'm sorry if these terminologies are a bit confusing, it is very React specific, but essentially the provider that wraps your application in React is essentially providing functionality to the components in the application. And then this component here, login button, is using use Auth0, which is a mechanism for getting information back from the Auth0 module, the npm module over here, and we're pulling out a function from that module called login with redirect. And what that does is it sends a redirect the user to the login page. And then we're returning a button. And when you click on that button, this is basically an anonymous function of sorts. We don't really care about any data coming in. We're basically going to say on click, we want to call the login with redirect. And the button name is going to say button login. So I'll save that. We'll come back into the app here, and I will add the login button. Now, my IntelliSense has automatically pulled this in for me when I type login button. If you're not using code or it's not auto-completing these for you, remember you do need to import that login button before you can use it in your application. If I hit save on that and we come back in here and we start npm again, we should get a login button. There we go, got a login button. And if I click on it, it's going to take us to the login page. Now, because I'm using the same tenant as before, and I was already logged in through the Express app, because remember, when the Express app was open, I didn't actually log out. So I'm actually still logged in. It's almost like single sign-on. It's quite cool. So you can have multiple applications within your one tenant, and when you're logged into one, you're logged into the others. So I'm just going to click on accept, and I should now be logged in. And again, we've still got the login button there, but we'll work on that. Let's come back into our code over here. So we've done this checkpoint. Now we're going to add a logout. So let's create this logout button. I'll create a new file over here. Logout button.js. So in this case, we're still using Auth0, and what we're doing is we're only pulling one function out. It's called logout. So now when we click on logout, the logout button is going to call logout. We're also passing in a return where we want them to go to. Because this logout button could be rendered on any page, we don't know where we want them to go back to. We want to return them back to the page they were currently on. Now, one thing to bear in mind is if you're logging out from a protected page, and we'll come to protected pages in a second, then you potentially have the issue where when they click logout, they'll go back to the protected page, and then they'll get redirected to the login. So if you have that, then you'll probably want to remove this return to, or specify something like send them back to whatever the home URL is for your application. So let's come back into the app button here, the app thingy, and we'll put in the logout button. And again, it's automatically imported that for us at the top there. So we now have the login and the logout button, but again, we want to know which one is which, whether or not they're logged in. Let's continue with the, before I get ahead of myself, let's continue with the quick start. So just checking on any questions, no new questions coming through. So let's now show the user profile. So we're going to create a new component called profile, and this will actually output some information as opposed to just the button. So we'll create profile.js. And I'm creating all these files in the source directory here. If I was creating a larger application, I would probably have a folder in here called pages, and I would put all of these, like the profile, into pages. I might have one called components, and I put the login buttons into the components folder and break it down. You can do that too. Again, just for the purpose of the demo, trying to keep it a little simpler. So for this one, we're using Auth0 again, and we're using the Auth0 hook here to pull in some information. Now what we want to do is find out information about the user. It's the profile page, so we need to know who the user is. We want to know if they're authenticated. There's also this great function here, or it's more of it's a Boolean, so it's a variable. I don't know, it's not a function. Is loading is going to be true if we're loading. Now think back again to the login process, and remember how I told you about the transparent reauthentication. Even if it's not transparent reauthentication, even if it's the first time you're logging in, when you get redirected back to the React application, it's not going to know yet whether or not the user's logged in. So there's this uncertain period. And during this uncertain period, we don't want to show a login or a logout button or a profile information header because we don't know whether we can actually show that yet. So while Auth0, while the module, the Auth0 React module here is still working out whether or not the user's logged in, and if the user is logged in, getting information about that user, is loading is going to be true. So we can use that to delay output of information until is loading is false, at which point at which point we'll then also know if they're logged in. So if we're loading, then we're just going to return a div saying loading. That's all. And then this component ends. As soon as this loading is false, so the loading is completed, we can then return other information. And we're chaining this Boolean here is authenticated using a double ampersand with a response. So this response will only get returned if is authenticated is also true. If they're authenticated, we're going to have a user object. So now we can return the image. Now remember in the payload JSON that we saw in the Express example, the image was the URL to my profile photo. So it's going to return that. And it's going to return the username and or rather just the name and the email. So I'll hit save there. And then it's not actually telling us where to put that, so that's good. I just want to double check that I've gotten everything from here. Yeah, cool. So now if I go to app and I put in the profile, save that. Again, it's automatically imported that up here. So now if I save and we come back to our application and hit, oh, I didn't even have to hit refresh. I love React. So it's pulled this information out. If I hit logout button now, then it's got an error. Something went wrong. I love this. So there's an outage because, all right, let's have a look at Auth0 error logging. So under monitoring, we'll have logs, and we'll be able to see there was a failed logout. The required to query string is not defined as a valid URL in allowed logout URLs. That's very true. We didn't define that in there. So under applications, in the React demo, pretty sure this is the one we were working on, the logout URL here, let's just copy that, and I'm going to change the logout button to use this instead. Actually, the other thing we can do is specify multiple valid URLs by comma separating them, and you can use the star symbol as a wildcard for subdomains. Query strings and hash information are not taken into account. So what I will do is I'll just copy that and we'll put that in here. Now, again, for production, obviously, it's not going to go here. So this is the kind of thing you'd want to move into an environment variable as well. So let's come back over here, go back, refresh. We're at a little bit of a stalemate at the moment because of that bug that I had. The application thinks I'm logged out, but Auth0 might still think I'm logged in. So let's see what happens when I click on login. Yeah, so it's automatically logged me in again because Auth0 thought that I was still logged in because of that bug. This shouldn't happen this time. So if I click on logout, we're now taken to the home page with nothing. We click on login again, I should be prompted, there we go, for my username and password. We're logged in again, and I have an account. Yeah, so you can now use all of these bits of information. Let's go back in here. So you can use is loading, is authenticated, and user to find out about the person who's logged in. You can call functions like logout and login with redirect. And the beautiful thing, if you're using VS Code, I highly recommend using VS Code for any of these things, because of course you've got your autocomplete as well. So you can do things like getting the access token. You can find out that is loading, is authenticated, log in with pop-up instead of login with redirect. I would recommend between the pop-up login and the redirect to use redirect. It's a more secure way of doing it because the page is then wholly on the Auth0 server, and we can keep that a lot more secure from things like cross-site scripting attacks. So definitely, unless you've got a really good reason to do a login with a pop-up, I would recommend using the login with redirect. But you can find out all of the things available to you in here. And obviously, as well, there's going to be the documentation on the Auth0 website. So I hope that's a really good brief intro to how to use Auth0, both for a traditional web application like Express, will also work for things like PHP, anything where there's a server involved, and also single-page applications like React and Vue and so forth. Let's just see if there's any other questions coming through. Can I provide a link for what? Question from Mairoti. I don't think using Auth0 is not compulsory in the hack to be able to for a student program. I don't think that's a question really, so I'll just skip that. Looks like there's just a conversation going on. That's fine. So if you do have any more questions, we're about to go into an AMA. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time, and good luck with the hack. So Abel, I think you're on the line as well. If you want to join that link, I think you should probably be able to be added in to the chat.
I think, Ben, that was an amazing session. We definitely feel we got a lot of good response, and I think a lot of people got some good insights as well. Thank you so much for that. Although I think we should also get to the swag giveaway, because people have been.
Of course. Yeah, you should tell them all about that.
Yeah. So for all the people who have been here for the swag giveaway, we have Auth0 with us, and Auth0 will be telling more about how we're gonna handle that. Auth0, over to you.
All right. So for the swags, we have a nice few number of t-shirts here for all of us. And we believe one of the best ways to get to that would be a quiz, of course. just to see what you know about Auth, how attentive you were throughout the session, plus maybe one or two things extra if you've been playing around with authentication related stuff. So we've got a nice Kahoot set up, and for that, what we have done is we've kept a meet link ready, and that is one of those places where we can have Kahoot, because I feel that sometimes with StreamYard, with a sort of a time
Right.
delay, we don't want that
There's a particular
we
time
have our
lag.
questions go through and then folks end up missing those altogether, because that happens at times. So we have a meet link ready for our participants to join in, and I think we could definitely have that happen. What do you say, Ben? How does that
I
sound?
think that sounds great. Let's do that.
Awesome.
Awesome.
So let me share the meet link here once, and I'll be there as well. I am available. I will be accepting requests of anyone who wants to join.
And everybody start joining that meeting. But before we end up this as well, I think Ben, we can even have the AMA. So we have a mentorship hour starting at 2 p.m. Which is
Yep.
for all the hackers out there. I think we can
Sure.
have a specific AMA there so that people would be able to get their doubts resolved. Would that work?
Yeah, that's fine.
Because that's we can just have a Discord stages, right, Aditya? It works
Yeah,
the same.
absolutely. I think it's a great experience, and even once raise hands can join in, ask their queries, discuss,
Yeah,
share their
that would be
experiences. So it tends to be a very nice, comfortable experience.
like that way people would be able to ask their questions directly, and like instead of this thing they would be able to ask their
Perfect.
questions on there.
I think that'll be
Awesome.
much easier.
Absolutely.
Let's do that.
The experience
Right.
is in fact similar to how Twitter Spaces go, so it's a great experience that way.
Great. All right.
Awesome. So I think we should move to the giveaway now. So Ben, would you be joining us there, or should we handle
Yes,
it?
I'll pop over. I'm more than happy for you to run it, but I will join in, and maybe I'll even compete and see if I can win myself a T-shirt.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
All right,
Sure.
cool. I'll see you all over there.
Awesome. So thank you so much everyone for joining, and don't go anywhere because hop onto that meet link. We are hosting the giveaway straight away, and we'll end this stream now. So bye everyone. The link is there in the chat section.
Bye, everyone. Good luck.